To my loving wife, Anya, I leave nothing. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp, like icicles in the dead of winter. Beatrice, her mother-in-law, let out a small satisfied breath, the sound barely hidden behind a lace handkerchief. Her eyes, a pale, unforgiving blue, met Anya's across the polished mahogany table, and in them, Anya saw not grief for her son, but the victory Beatrice had craved for years. The lawyer, a man named Gideon, wouldn't look at her. He just stared down at the document as if the words themselves had betrayed him, his face a mask of stone. Anya's world, already shattered by loss, was now being ground into dust under the heel of the one person who was supposed to be family. Hello, my amazing family and friends. I'm so glad you're here with me again today. If you're ready to dive into another powerful story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me the country or city you're watching from. And guess what? Tomorrow, I've got another story lined up that will leave you just as captivated, so don't miss it. Now, let's get started. The silence in their little house was the first thing a visitor would notice. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, thick quiet that clung to the furniture and seeped into the walls. For Anya, it was the sound of a life that had suddenly stopped. Before, there was always noise. Nathan's off-key humming as he made coffee in the morning, the sound of the news channel he always left on too loud, his heavy footsteps on the old wooden stairs. Now, there was just the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of Anya's own heart. She ran a hand over the dining table, a fine layer of dust coating her fingertips. They used to eat here every night. Nathan would talk about his day, his hands moving as he described the boring details of his office job, but his eyes would be sparkling, just for her. Now the chairs were empty. The salt and pepper shakers stood like little soldiers, waiting for a command that would never come. Anya walked into the living room and sank onto the sofa, pulling a worn gray blanket over her legs. It still smelled like him. A faint scent of wood smoke and the cheap soap he loved. She buried her face in it, breathing him in, trying to pretend he was just in the other room, that he would walk in any second and ask what was for dinner. But the smell was fading. With each passing day, a little more of him vanished, and the panic of forgetting him was a cold knot in her stomach. The house was filled with ghosts of laughter, ghosts of arguments over silly things, ghosts of gentle touches and whispered secrets. Every corner held a memory, and every memory was a fresh cut on a wound that wouldn't heal. It had been a month since the accident, but it felt like 100 years and a single endless second all at once. Across town, in an office that smelled of lemon polish and old paper, Gideon loosened his tie. His desk was perfectly organized. Pens stood in a neat row. Files were stacked in sharp, clean piles. His life was a series of neat boxes, and he preferred it that way. Emotions were messy. Grief was unpredictable. He dealt in facts, in clauses, in the cold, hard print of last wills and testaments. He had seen families tear each other apart over silver spoons and old clocks. He had watched children weep and parents rage. It was all just part of the job. But this case felt different. Nathan's file sat in the center of his desk, a single stark folder in the middle of all that order. He remembered Nathan. A kind, quiet man who had come in alone to draw up his will a year ago. He had seemed so full of life, so certain of his future. Now he was a file on a desk. Gideon opened the file for the 10th time that day. The words were clear. I, Nathan, being of sound mind and body. He had drafted it himself, following Nathan's exact instructions. But reading them now, knowing the man was gone, they felt wrong. Cruel. He thought of Anya, the young woman he had only met once, briefly. He remembered her eyes, the way they lit up when she looked at her husband. He couldn't square the image of the loving couple with the cold words on the page. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. Beatrice. He sighed and let it go to voicemail. He wasn't in the mood for her sharp, demanding voice. He was just the lawyer. His job was to execute the will as written. It wasn't his place to question it. It wasn't his place to feel anything at all. But as he stared out his window at the bustling city below, a strange unease settled over him. It felt like a puzzle with a missing piece. Back in the silent house, the phone rang, jolting Anya from her daze. She stared at it, her heart pounding. For a crazy second, she thought it might be him. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. "Hello." Her voice was a croak. "Anya." The voice was crisp and cold. "Beatrice. I trust you are preparing to vacate the premises. The house is part of the estate, as you know. It now belongs to me." Anya couldn't speak. The house. Their home. The place Nathan and she had poured all their love and dreams into. "Beatrice, please," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go." "That is not my concern," the woman said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "The will is clear. You have 2 weeks. My lawyer will be in touch with the official notice." And then she hung up. The dial tone buzzed in Anya's ear, a final mocking sound. Anya dropped the phone and stared at the wall, at the framed photo of Nathan and her on their wedding day. They were so happy, so full of hope. His arm was wrapped around her, and they were both laughing, completely unaware of the darkness waiting for them. The will reading was scheduled for the next day. A part of Anya, a small foolish part, held on to a sliver of hope that there was a mistake. That Nathan would never, ever leave her with nothing. But hearing Beatrice's voice, so full of cold triumph, she knew something was terribly wrong. Her world was not just silent anymore. It was shrinking, and soon there would be nothing left at all. What do you think Nathan was thinking when he wrote that will? Was it an act of malice, or is there a deeper story that we can't see yet? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The next morning, Anya dressed in a simple black dress, the one she had worn to Nathan's funeral. It felt appropriate. She was mourning him all over again, but this time, she was mourning the man she thought she knew. The drive to the lawyer's office was a blur. The city she and Nathan had loved exploring together now felt alien and hostile. Every street corner, every park bench, held a memory that mocked her. Gideon's office was on the top floor of a tall glass building that scraped the sky. It felt cold and impersonal, a place where feelings were filed away in manila folders. Beatrice was already there, seated in a plush leather chair as if it were a throne. She wore a tailored navy blue suit with a string of pearls at her neck. She looked severe, powerful, and completely in control. She gave Anya a brief, dismissive nod, her lips pressed into a thin, unsmiling line. Anya took the seat opposite her, the large mahogany desk separating them like a battlefield. The air was thick with unspoken animosity, so heavy Anya could barely breathe. She clasped her hands in her lap to stop them from shaking, her knuckles turning white. Gideon entered the room, carrying a single folder. He looked tired, his face etched with a tension that hadn't been there the day before. He offered Anya a small sympathetic glance before schooling his features back into a professional mask. He sat down, placed the folder on the desk, and cleared his throat. "Thank you both for coming," he began, his voice low and formal. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Nathan. I will now read the document in its entirety." He opened the folder. The rustle of the paper was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. Anya held her breath. Gideon began to read, his voice a steady drone as he went through the legal formalities, the date, the witnesses, the declaration of a sound mind. Anya's mind drifted. She saw Nathan at this very desk, perhaps, telling this very man what to write. What could he have been thinking? Did he hate her? Had their entire marriage been a lie? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Then, Gideon's voice changed, slowing down as he reached the critical part. He paused, just for a second, and his eyes flickered towards Anya before dropping back to the page. "To my mother Beatrice," he read, "I leave my collection of antique maps, in gratitude for the many journeys we took together in my youth." Beatrice's chin lifted a fraction of an inch. It was a small inheritance, a token. Anya felt a tiny, fragile bloom of hope. Maybe she had been wrong. Gideon took a deep breath. And as for the remainder of my estate, including all property, finances, and personal effects. He paused again, and this time the silence stretched, tightening the knot in Anya's stomach. She looked from Gideon's grim face to Beatrice's expectant one. The lawyer's gaze was fixed on the paper, his jaw tight. I leave it as follows. He looked directly at Anya, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of genuine regret in his eyes. He seemed to be bracing himself. To my loving wife, Anya. The words were a soft blow, a gentle start to a brutal sentence. Loving wife. The phrase twisted in her gut. She leaned forward, every fiber of her being focused on the next word. Gideon's voice was barely above a whisper. I leave nothing. The world stopped. The ticking of the ornate clock on the wall became a deafening thud. The faint sound of traffic from the street below faded away. Nothing. The word echoed in the vast empty space that had just opened up inside of her. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was the absolute, crushing finality of it. It was Nathan, her Nathan, reaching out from beyond the grave to slap her in the face. To tell her she meant nothing to him. Anya stared at Gideon, her mind refusing to process the word. It had to be a mistake. A cruel joke. But the lawyer's pained expression and Beatrice's triumphant little sigh confirmed it. Beatrice subtly adjusted her pearls, a small predatory smile playing on her lips. It was the look of a hunter who had finally cornered her prey. The entirety of the residual estate, Gideon continued, his voice now sounding far away, including the property at 12 Maple Lane, all bank accounts and investments, I bequeath to my mother, Beatrice. The final nail. Anya felt the air leave her lungs in a silent gasp. She couldn't feel her hands, her feet. A cold numbness spread through her limbs. She looked at Beatrice, truly looked at her, and saw the raw, undisguised hatred that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Beatrice had won. She had taken not only Anya's husband but her home, her security, her entire life. Well, Beatrice said, her voice smooth as silk as she stood up. That seems quite clear. She turned to Anya, her eyes cold and hard as stone. As I mentioned, you have 2 weeks to vacate the house. I trust you will leave it in the condition you found it. She didn't wait for a response. With a final victorious glance, she swept out of the room, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume and the wreckage of Anya's world behind her. Anya remained frozen in her chair, staring at the empty space where her mother-in-law had stood. Gideon closed the folder softly. Anya, he said, his voice gentle. I am so sorry. She couldn't answer. The words were trapped in her throat, choked by a wave of grief so powerful it threatened to pull her under. She had lost Nathan a month ago. But in this cold, sterile office, she had lost him all over again. And this time, it hurt even more. She finally pushed herself to her feet, her movements stiff and robotic, and walked out of the office, not seeing Gideon's outstretched hand or the profound pity in his eyes. The world she stepped back into was the same one she had left, but for Anya, everything had changed. She was no longer a grieving widow. She was a ghost, haunting a life that was no longer hers. Anya walked for hours, though she couldn't have said where she went. The city noise was a dull roar in her ears, the people a series of blurry shapes she moved through and around. Her feet ached and her throat was dry, but the physical discomfort was a distant echo compared to the screaming void inside her. The man she had loved, the man who had held her at night and promised her forever, had deliberately and methodically erased her from his life. It was a betrayal so deep it felt like it had rewritten her past, turning every happy memory into a lie. When she finally returned to the house on Maple Lane, the key felt strange in her hand. This wasn't her home anymore. It was a ticking clock, counting down the seconds until she was cast out. Inside, the silence was no longer heavy, it was mocking. The life they had built here felt like a stage set for a play that had ended abruptly, and she was the last actor left, with no lines and nowhere to go. She drifted from room to room, touching the back of his favorite armchair, running her fingers over the books he'd been reading, his bookmark still peeking out from the pages. She forced herself upstairs to the bedroom. If she had to leave, she had to start somewhere. She pulled a dusty suitcase from the top of the closet and opened it on the bed. The empty space yawned at her. What was she supposed to pack? Her clothes? Her toiletries? How do you pack a life? She opened a drawer and her hand stilled. On top of a pile of Nathan's soft t-shirts was a small velvet box. She hadn't seen it in years. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded white satin, was a simple silver locket. He had given it to her on their first anniversary. She opened the locket. On one side was a tiny, poorly cut photo of him, grinning so wide his eyes were crinkled shut. On the other, a picture of her, taken on the same day, her head thrown back in laughter. Beneath her photo, he had scratched 2 words into the silver with a pin: "My everything." A sob tore from her chest, raw and ragged. This was the Nathan she knew. The man who called her his everything. He would never, ever have left her with nothing. He wouldn't. The will was a lie. Beatrice had to be behind it somehow. She didn't know how, but holding the locket in her hand, she felt the first flicker of fight ignite amidst the ashes of her grief. She would not let Beatrice win. She would not let her destroy this last, true memory of Nathan. Meanwhile, back in his high-rise office, Gideon couldn't focus. The neat stacks of paper on his desk seemed to mock him. He kept seeing Anya's face, her eyes wide with a shock that went beyond grief into a place of profound betrayal. He was a lawyer. He dealt with facts. The fact was, Nathan's will was legally sound. It was witnessed, signed, and unambiguous. His job was done. Yet, the emotional mess of it all clung to him like smoke. He kept replaying the reading in his head: Beatrice's smug satisfaction, Anya's devastation. It felt wrong. It felt unjust. His phone rang, and Beatrice's name flashed on the screen. He sighed and answered, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Gideon speaking. "I trust you have started the paperwork for the eviction," she said, without any preamble. Her voice was like gravel. "I'll have it sent out tomorrow, Beatrice," he said. "See that you do. I want her out. I plan to have the house cleared and listed for sale by the end of the month. The market is very strong right now." Gideon felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. It was her home, Beatrice. She just lost her husband. There was a cold little laugh on the other end of the line. Her husband made his wishes perfectly clear, did he not? "You are my lawyer now, Gideon. I expect you to act accordingly. Do not disappoint me." The line went dead. Gideon stared at the phone, a deep-seated dislike for the woman solidifying into something harder. He opened Nathan's file again, his eyes scanning the black and white text for the 100th time. It was perfect. Too perfect. Nathan had been a warm, slightly chaotic person in Gideon's memory. This document was cold, precise, and utterly ruthless. It didn't feel like him. It felt like someone else's words, someone else's intentions. He was resisting the urge to get involved. It wasn't his place. It wasn't his problem. But the image of Anya's stricken face was burned into his mind. On an impulse, he pulled up her contact information from the client intake form. He stared at her phone number. Calling her would be a breach of professional distance. It would complicate things. It would drag him into the messy, emotional center of a fight that wasn't his. He should just file the eviction notice, close the file, and move on to the next case. It was the logical thing to do. The professional thing to do. But as he looked at the number, he knew he couldn't. He couldn't just let it go. With a deep breath, fighting against every instinct for self-preservation he picked up his phone and dialed. Anya's phone buzzed on the coffee table, a harsh, intrusive sound that made her jump. She looked at the screen, an unknown number glowing in the dim light. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Every call could be another blow, another person demanding something she no longer had. But the flicker of fight that the locket had ignited urged her to answer. She picked it up, her voice wary. "Hello. Anya? It's Gideon, the lawyer." His voice was hesitant, a stark contrast to the formal drone from the will reading. Anya's heart sank. He was calling to start the eviction process, to deliver the final, official blow. She braced herself. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone colder than she intended. There was a pause on the other end. "I know this is a difficult time," he began slowly, carefully. "And I know I represent the estate now, but I wanted to say again how sorry I am. For your loss and for the reading today." The unexpected kindness threw her off balance. "Sorry doesn't change anything," she said, but the sharp edge was gone from her voice, replaced by a weary sadness. "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "Listen, this is unprofessional, and I could get into a lot of trouble for this call, but something about this doesn't sit right with me." Anya clutched the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" "Your husband," Gideon said, and he sounded genuinely perplexed. "When he came to see me to draft the will, he spent half the appointment talking about you. He called you his compass. He said you were the one who always pointed him north. The man I met would never have written what was on that paper. It's not just the sentiment, the language is different. It's clinical, cold. His compass." The words hit Anya like a physical touch. It was something Nathan used to say to her in quiet moments, when they were curled up on the sofa, talking about their future. It wasn't a grand declaration, just a small private truth between them. And this man, this stranger, knew it. For the first time since the reading, she didn't feel completely alone. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm saying I have a hunch," Gideon said. "But as Beatrice's lawyer, my hands are tied. I can't officially investigate anything. But I think you should. I think you need to look for something." Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through Anya's numbness. "Look for what?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Something out of place. Anything in Nathan's personal effects from the last few months. Receipts, notes, emails you might have overlooked. Beatrice is moving fast. You don't have a lot of time. Can we meet? Somewhere public. Tomorrow." Anya hesitated. Trust was a fragile thing, and hers was shattered. But he had given her a piece of her Nathan back. His compass. It was a lifeline. "Okay," she said. "Where?" They met the next day at a small anonymous coffee shop halfway between her house and his office. The air smelled of burnt coffee and sugar. Anya sat nursing a cup she didn't touch, watching the door. When Gideon walked in, he looked different from the man in the severe suit. In jeans and a simple sweater, he looked younger, less intimidating. He slid into the booth opposite her, a tense, awkward silence settling between them. "Thank you for coming," he said, his eyes scanning the cafe, ensuring they were just two more faceless customers. "You said I should look for something," Anya said, getting straight to the point. "But I don't even know where to begin." "Start with the weeks leading up to the accident," Gideon said, his voice low. "Go through his papers, his computer. Don't look for things that make sense. Look for things that don't. A big withdrawal from the bank. A charge on a credit card for something you can't explain. Any communication that seems strange." He leaned forward slightly. "Beatrice is aggressive. She wouldn't leave things to chance. If she was involved, she would have needed leverage. Or she would have needed to manipulate Nathan when he was vulnerable." The idea was ugly, but it made a dark kind of sense. "She hated me from the day Nathan and I met," Anya said softly, staring into her cup. "She thought I wasn't good enough for him." "This isn't just about not being good enough," Gideon countered gently. "This is about a sizable estate. Nathan's father was very successful. Beatrice has always controlled the family money, and she doesn't like to let go. He slid a business card across the table. It was his personal number. I can't act as your lawyer, but if you find anything at all, call me. I can tell you what it means, legally. Anya looked at the card, then up at him. Why are you doing this? You're risking your job. Gideon looked out the window, a thoughtful expression on his face. Let's just say I believe the law is supposed to serve justice. And what happened in my office yesterday wasn't justice. It felt like a theft. He stood up to leave. Be careful, Anya. Don't let Beatrice know you're looking for anything. She's watching you. Anya watched him walk out of the coffee shop and disappear into the crowd. She was still terrified, still heartbroken, but now she had something she hadn't had before, a direction, a purpose. She was no longer a victim, waiting to be evicted. She was a woman with a mission. She had to find the truth. For Nathan. For the man who called her his compass. She picked up Gideon's card, her fingers closing around the sharp edges. It felt less like a piece of paper and more like a key. Now, she just had to find the lock. Anya returned to the house with a new sense of urgency. The 2-week deadline loomed over her, a constant pressing weight. Beatrice's threat was no longer just a cruel promise. It was a ticking clock on her search for the truth. She started in Nathan's home office, a small cluttered room that had always been his private sanctuary. It was filled with his personality, stacks of science fiction paperbacks, a half-finished model airplane on a shelf, and a whiteboard covered in complex equations she never understood. It felt like a violation to be in here without him, but Gideon's words echoed in her mind. Look for things that don't make sense. She began with the obvious, the filing cabinet. It was unlocked, and she pulled open the top drawer. It was filled with old tax returns, car maintenance records, and appliance warranties. Everything was mundane, normal. For 2 days, she sorted through every piece of paper, her hope dwindling with each empty folder. She moved to his desk, sifting through piles of mail and old notes. Nothing. It was all just the predictable clutter of a life lived. She found receipts for their anniversary dinner, movie ticket stubs from a date night, a brochure for a vacation to the coast they had been planning. Each discovery was a fresh wave of grief, a reminder of the future that had been stolen from them. Her search of his laptop was just as fruitless. His email inbox was filled with work messages and junk mail. His browser history showed searches for new hiking boots and reviews for a restaurant they wanted to try. There were no secret communications, no hidden accounts. It was the digital footprint of the man she knew and loved. The man who would never have hurt her. Defeated, she sank into his desk chair, the worn leather sighing under her weight. Was Gideon wrong? Was she just a desperate widow, clinging to a fantasy because the reality was too painful to bear? She stared at the blank computer screen, her own exhausted reflection staring back at her. Her eyes drifted to the bookshelf. Nathan had loved his books, treating each one with a reverence she found endearing. She ran her fingers along the spines, a colorful mix of fantasy, history, and science. One book stood out, not because it was special, but because it was out of place. It was a thin hardback copy of The Little Prince, a book he had read to her once when she was sick. It was wedged between 2 thick history tomes, shoved in at an odd angle as if in a hurry. On impulse, she pulled it from the shelf. It felt lighter than she expected. As she held it, a single piece of paper, folded neatly into a small square, slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. Her heart leaped. Her hands shook as she bent to pick it up. It was a receipt from a pharmacy, dated 2 months before the accident. It was for a prescription she didn't recognize, under a doctor's name she had never heard of. But that wasn't what made her blood run cold. The prescription was for Beatrice, and it had been paid for in cash by Nathan. Why was Nathan paying for his mother's prescription? And why cash? Beatrice had excellent insurance and more than enough money. It made no sense. This was it. This was the piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. She immediately took a photo of the receipt and sent it to Gideon with a simple message, "Found something." His reply came almost instantly. "Call me." Anya's fingers fumbled as she dialed his number. "I found a receipt," she said, her voice breathless. "It's for a prescription for Beatrice, but Nathan paid for it. In cash." She could hear the sound of typing on his end. "What's the name of the medication?" he asked, his voice all business. Anya read the unfamiliar name from the receipt. There was a moment of silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath from Gideon. "Anya," he said, his voice low and serious. "That's not a standard medication. It's an experimental drug. It's used in early-stage clinical trials for a rare, aggressive form of dementia." Dementia. The word hung in the air, heavy and dark. "Beatrice has dementia?" Anya asked, completely stunned. Beatrice was sharp as a tack, her mind a steel trap. It was impossible. Or, Gideon said slowly, the pieces clicking into place in his mind, someone wanted it to look like she did. That drug has very specific, very potent side effects, especially if given to a healthy person. Confusion, memory loss, paranoia, impaired judgment. The implications washed over Anya in a sickening wave. "You think Nathan was giving this to his mother?" The thought was monstrous. "No," Gideon said firmly. "I think the opposite. Think about it, Anya. A man is worried his mother is trying to manipulate him. He knows she's ruthless. What if he found out she was sick? He wouldn't cut her off. He'd try to help her. He might pay for her medication in cash to protect her privacy, to keep it off the insurance records." It sounded exactly like something the kind, compassionate Nathan would do. But what if she wasn't sick? Gideon continued, his voice tight with dawning realization. What if she got her hands on that prescription? What if she started slipping it to him? Anya's world tilted on its axis. The confusion. The memory loss. Impaired judgment. In the last few weeks of his life, Nathan had been different. He'd become forgetful, losing his keys, missing appointments. He'd seemed distant, anxious. She had chalked it up to stress from work. She had tried to be patient, to be supportive. But what if it wasn't stress? There was this one time, Anya whispered, a specific memory surfacing with chilling clarity. About a week before the accident. He called me from the office, totally panicked. He couldn't remember the drive to work. He said it was like he just woke up at his desk. Anya, Gideon's voice was grim. If she was drugging him, he wouldn't have been of sound mind and body when he changed that will. If we can prove it, we can invalidate the whole thing. A tiny spark of hope became a raging fire. "How?" she asked. "How can we prove it?" "We need more than a receipt," he said. "We need the what for. Why did he get that prescription in the first place? He must have had a reason to suspect she was ill. There has to be a doctor's report, a diagnosis, something. Check his computer again. Look for hidden files, password-protected documents. Search for the doctor's name from the receipt. Search for the name of the drug. He was a smart man, Anya. He would have kept a record." The house was no longer just a house. It was a crime scene. And Anya was no longer just looking for a clue. She was looking for proof of a betrayal so dark, so twisted, it was almost unimaginable. She had to find it. She had to expose what Beatrice had done, not just for herself, but for the man they had both destroyed. Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong, even when all the evidence pointed to the contrary? How important is it to trust that instinct? Share your thoughts in the comments. The discovery of the receipt changed everything. The house, once a tomb of memories, now felt like a repository of secrets. Anya's grief was still a raw, open wound, but now it was sharpened by a cold, clear anger. She went back to Nathan's office with a singular focus, her eyes scanning everything with a new suspicious lens. The doctor's name from the receipt was Dr. Alistair Finch. She typed it into Nathan's search engine, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The results were immediate. Dr. Finch was a leading neurologist in the city, specializing in degenerative brain disorders. His office was located in a private medical building downtown, a place Nathan had never mentioned visiting. She then searched for the drug's name, and article after article confirmed what Gideon had suspected. It was a powerful experimental medication with severe cognitive side effects for healthy individuals. The articles used words like profound confusion and short-term amnesia. It was a perfect, untraceable weapon for someone looking to manipulate another person's mind. Armed with this new information, Anya turned her attention back to the laptop. Gideon had suggested hidden files. She wasn't a tech expert, but Nathan had once shown her how to reveal hidden folders on his computer when they were looking for a misplaced file. With a few clicks, a series of grayed-out folders appeared on the desktop. Most were system files, but one was labeled with a single cryptic letter, N. Her breath hitched. N for Nathan. Or N for North, his private nickname for her. Her compass. She clicked on it. It was password protected. A small box popped up, demanding a password she didn't have. She tried the obvious ones first. Her name, his name, their anniversary, the name of their dog. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. Frustration mounted. What would he have used? It would be something deeply personal, something only he would know. She thought back to his office, his passions. The model airplanes, the science fiction books. She tried the names of his favorite authors, his favorite characters. Nothing. She leaned back, her mind racing. It had to be something simple, something meaningful. Her gaze fell on the silver locket she was now wearing around her neck. She opened it, looking at the two tiny scratched words beneath her picture, "My everything." It was a long shot, but her fingers trembled as she typed the two words into the password box, no spaces, all lowercase. "My everything." She hit enter. The box vanished. The folder opened. Inside was a single file, a video diary. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she double-clicked it. Nathan's face filled the screen. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed with worry. He wasn't in his office, but in his car, parked somewhere dark. The date stamp in the corner was from 6 weeks before his death. "I don't know why I'm doing this," he began, his voice low and strained, as if he were afraid of being overheard. "Maybe just to get it straight in my own head. It's my mother. Something's wrong." He ran a hand through his hair. "She's been different. Forgetting things. She called me by my father's name the other day. And she keeps talking about selling the house, our house. She says it's a bad investment. She's never cared about money like that, not really." He looked directly into the camera, and his eyes were filled with a desperate plea. "I'm worried she's sick. I found a doctor, a specialist. Dr. Finch. I made an appointment for her, but she refused to go. So I went myself. I described her symptoms, and he was concerned. He said it could be something serious." The video jumped to a few days later. Nathan looked worse. He was pale, and there was a tremor in his hand as he held the phone. "I got a copy of her medical records," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I shouldn't have, I know, but I was desperate. And I found it. A diagnosis from years ago, buried in her file. Early onset dementia. She's known for years, Anya. She's been hiding it." He looked utterly devastated. "I got her a prescription. Something new, something that might help slow it down. She won't take it from me. Says there's nothing wrong with her. But I have to try. I have to help her." The final video clip was dated just 2 weeks before the accident. He was back in his car, but this time, he was a different person. His eyes were unfocused, his speech slightly slurred. "Something's wrong with me," he said, the confusion clear in his voice. I can't think straight. The days are blurry. Mom has been coming over a lot, bringing me tea. She says it's to help me relax. But after she leaves, I feel worse." He squinted at the camera, as if trying to remember something important. "She came over today. With her lawyer. They had papers. They said I needed to sign them. To protect you. To protect the assets from my confusion." He shook his head, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "I don't remember signing anything. But there's ink on my fingers. Anya, I'm so sorry. I think I did something terrible. I love you. You're my everything. Don't ever forget that. Don't let her." The video cut out abruptly. Anya stared at the black screen, her body numb with horror. It was all there. The motive, the means, the confession. Beatrice hadn't been sick. She had faked the symptoms, refused the appointment, and then when Nathan found her old, hidden diagnosis and got her the medicine, she had turned it on him. She had used his love and compassion as a weapon against him. She had systematically poisoned her own son, clouded his mind, and then forced him to sign away his wife's future. Anya saved a copy of the video file to a small flash drive, her movements precise and mechanical. The grief was still there, but it was now forged into a core of pure, unyielding steel. This was the proof. This was the weapon she needed. She picked up her phone and called Gideon. "I found it," she said, her voice shaking with rage and sorrow. "I found everything." Gideon's voice was sharp with urgency. "Don't say anything more over the phone. Where are you?" "At the house," Anya replied, her hand tightening around the small flash drive in her pocket. It felt both impossibly heavy and as light as a feather. "Stay there. Lock the doors. Don't answer them for anyone but me." "I'm on my way," he commanded, and the line went dead. The 20 minutes it took for Gideon to arrive were the longest of Anya's life. She paced the living room, the video of Nathan's tormented face playing on a loop in her mind. The house, their sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the old floorboards made her heart jump. Beatrice had been in this house. She had sat on this sofa, pouring tea for her son, knowing full well it was laced with a drug that was eroding his mind. The domesticity of the act made it 1,000 times more monstrous. When the doorbell rang, Anya nearly screamed. She crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. Gideon stood on her porch, his face set and grim. She quickly unlocked the door and let him in, locking it again behind him. "You have it?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting Beatrice to leap out from behind the curtains. Anya nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She led him to Nathan's office and inserted the flash drive into the laptop. She didn't want to watch the video again, couldn't bear to see Nathan in that state, but she knew Gideon had to. She stood by the window with her back to the screen, staring out into the dark garden as Nathan's strained, confused voice filled the small room. She heard the tremor in his words, the heartbreak, the final desperate "don't let her." When it was over, the silence was profound. She turned to look at Gideon. He was sitting in Nathan's desk chair, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He wasn't the slick, professional lawyer anymore. He looked shaken, his composure completely gone. "This is worse than I ever imagined," he said, his voice muffled. He looked up at her, and his eyes were filled with a mixture of horror and cold fury. She didn't just manipulate him. She tortured him. She used his best quality, his compassion, to destroy him. He stood up and began to pace the small office, his mind clearly working, processing the legal ramifications. "This video is everything," he said, thinking aloud. "It proves lack of capacity. It proves undue influence. It's grounds to contest the will and have it thrown out completely." He stopped and looked at her. "But it's more than that, Anya. This is a criminal matter. What she did, it's aggravated assault. At the very least. We have to take this to the police. The thought of police, of a public trial, of having her private grief and Nathan's suffering laid bare for the world to see, was terrifying. But the image of Beatrice's smug, triumphant face at the will reading burned in her mind. She deserved to face consequences for what she had done. What do we do first? Anya asked, her voice steadier now. Having him here, a partner in this nightmare, made her feel stronger. First, we secure this evidence, he said, ejecting the flash drive and placing it carefully in his wallet. Then we get you out of this house. It's not safe for you here. Beatrice is expecting an eviction, not a fight. When you don't leave, she'll get suspicious. I have a friend, a former client, who owns a small guest house. It's private, secure. You can stay there. He was taking charge, and for the first time in a month, Anya felt like she could breathe. She wasn't just a grieving widow being tossed aside. She was a fighter with a powerful ally. A small, fragile bond was forming between them, forged in the crucible of Nathan's tragedy. It wasn't romantic. It was a connection built on a shared pursuit of justice, a mutual respect that was growing with every passing moment. Okay, she said. They spent the next hour packing a small bag for her. It was a strange, surreal experience. Gideon, the lawyer from the sterile high-rise office, was carefully folding her sweaters and placing them in a suitcase while she gathered her toiletries. They worked in near silence, a comfortable quiet having replaced the awkward tension of their first meeting. In this shared task, they found a strange sort of normalcy, a brief respite from the darkness of their discovery. As she was about to close her bag, her eyes fell on the silver locket on her dresser. She picked it up, her thumb tracing the smooth, cool metal. He gave me this, she said softly. Gideon stopped what he was doing and looked at her. He scratched my everything on the inside, she continued, her voice thick with emotion. That was the password. That's how I found the video. Gideon looked at the locket, then back at her face. He saw the love and the pain warring in her eyes. He was a smart man, he said gently. He left you a key. He knew you'd find it. He trusted you. His words were a comfort, a balm on her wounded heart. Nathan hadn't abandoned her. He had been fighting for her, even as his mind was being stolen from him. He had left her a breadcrumb trail, a path out of the darkness, trusting that his compass would find her way. Let's go, Gideon said, taking her suitcase. It's time to start fighting back. As Anya took one last look around the living room, at the ghosts of the life she had shared with Nathan, she felt a profound sense of resolve. She wasn't leaving her home. She was retreating to fight for it. Beatrice had taken her husband, her security, and her peace of mind. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had underestimated the woman her son had loved. She had underestimated his compass. And now, the needle was pointing directly at her. The guest house was a small, charming cottage tucked away behind a larger home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was cozy and anonymous, a perfect sanctuary. For the first time in weeks, Anya felt a flicker of safety. Gideon left her with a spare key and a promise to call the next morning with a plan. Alone, surrounded by unfamiliar walls, the adrenaline of the past few hours began to fade, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But as she lay down to sleep, it wasn't Beatrice's cruel face or Nathan's pained expression that filled her mind. It was Gideon's. The way he had looked at her, the unexpected gentleness in his voice, the fierce, protective anger in his eyes on her behalf. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was becoming her anchor in this storm. The next morning, Gideon called as promised. He had been up all night consulting with a trusted colleague in criminal law. The video is our atomic bomb, he explained, his voice crisp and focused. But Beatrice will fight back. She'll claim Nathan was unstable, that you're a bitter wife trying to cheat her out of her rightful inheritance. Her lawyers will try to tear you apart on the stand. So what do we do? Anya asked, her stomach twisting into a knot. We don't give them the chance, Gideon said. We don't go to the police first. We go to her. We control the narrative. He paused. I've arranged a meeting. At my office. Tomorrow morning. Just you, me, and Beatrice. The thought of facing Beatrice again made Anya feel physically ill. Why? What's the point? The point, Gideon said, his voice hardening, is to give her one chance to do the right thing. We present her with the evidence, quietly. We offer her a choice. She can either sign a confession, nullify the will, and walk away, or we can release the video to the district attorney and the press simultaneously. She can face public humiliation and a prison sentence, or she can salvage what's left of her reputation and her freedom. It was a bold, risky strategy. It was a bluff, but a powerful one. Anya felt a surge of fear, but also a thrill of empowerment. They were no longer on the defensive. They were taking the fight to Beatrice. Okay, she said, her voice firm. I'll be there. That night, Anya couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of the guest house, clutching the silver locket. She thought about Nathan, about his kindness and his love. He would have hated this confrontation, this ugliness. But he also would have wanted the truth to come out. He would have wanted her to be safe. She was doing this for him. And she realized, she was also doing it for herself. She was fighting for her own future, a future that Beatrice had tried to steal. The next morning, Anya dressed with care. She chose a simple, elegant navy blue dress, one that made her feel strong and composed. When she met Gideon in the lobby of his building, he gave her an appreciative nod. You look ready, he said. I am, she replied, and it was the truth. They rode the elevator up in silence, a shared, nervous energy between them. As they walked into the conference room, the scene was an eerie echo of the will reading. Beatrice was already there, seated at the head of the polished mahogany table, her back ramrod straight. She was flanked by a stern-looking man in an expensive suit, her lawyer. Beatrice's eyes narrowed as Anya and Gideon entered together. She hadn't expected them to be a united front. Gideon, she said, her voice dripping with ice. I am very disappointed. I hired you to execute my son's will, not to conspire with this gold digger. Gideon ignored the insult. He sat down opposite her, placing his briefcase on the table. Anya took the seat beside him, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She met Beatrice's hateful glare without flinching. We are not here to discuss my employment, Beatrice, Gideon said, his tone flat and professional. We are here to discuss a crime. Beatrice's lawyer scoffed. A crime? These are baseless accusations. My client is the victim here, forced to deal with a frivolous challenge to her son's final wishes. Gideon didn't even look at the other lawyer. His eyes were locked on Beatrice. We have evidence, Beatrice. Proof that you systematically drugged your son for weeks, impairing his judgment and forcing him to sign a will that disinherited his wife. Beatrice let out a short, sharp laugh, but her eyes flickered with the first sign of fear. That's absurd. You have nothing. Gideon slowly opened his briefcase. He took out a small tablet and placed it on the center of the table. Nathan kept a video diary, he said quietly. He pressed play. Nathan's tired, worried face filled the screen. The room went silent, the only sound his strained voice talking about his mother's illness. Anya watched Beatrice's face. The mask of arrogant composure began to crack. Her skin grew pale, her manicured hands gripping the edge of the table. When the video got to the part where Nathan described being drugged with tea, a small strangled sound escaped her lips. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. When the video ended with Nathan's desperate, unfinished plea, Gideon turned it off. The silence that followed was deafening. He kept the receipt for the prescription too, Gideon added, his voice like chipping ice. And we have a statement from Dr. Finch about the effects of that drug on a healthy person. We have everything. Beatrice stared at the blank screen, her face a ghastly shade of gray. The triumphant hunter was gone. In her place was a trapped, terrified old woman. "Here is your choice," Gideon said, sliding a document across the table. "This is a legal confession. You will sign it, admitting to the fraudulent procurement of the will. You will renounce all claims to Nathan's estate. In return, this video and the other evidence will remain private. We will not press criminal charges." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "Or you can refuse. And in 1 hour, this video will be on every news channel in the city, and I will be personally handing it over to the DA. You will lose everything. Your money, your reputation, your freedom. Choose." Beatrice's lawyer snatched the document, his eyes scanning it frantically. He whispered something in her ear, but she didn't seem to hear him. She just stared at Gideon, then at Anya. In her eyes, Anya saw not remorse, but pure, undiluted hatred. But beneath it, there was also stark, primal fear. "You won't get away with this," Beatrice hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You already didn't," Anya said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. "You lost the moment you decided my husband's love was something you could control. He was a good man. And he loved me. That is something you can never take away." The lawyer spoke again, his voice urgent. "Beatrice, sign it. It's the only way." For a long moment, Beatrice was still. The fight seemed to drain out of her, leaving behind a brittle, hollow shell. Her shoulders slumped. With a trembling hand, she reached for the pen her lawyer offered her. Her signature was a spidery, jagged scrawl, the handwriting of a defeated woman. She signed the last page and shoved the document back across the table. Without another word, without even a final glance at Anya, she stood up and walked stiffly out of the room, her lawyer trailing behind her like a shadow. They were gone. It was over. Anya let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The tension drained from her body, leaving her feeling weak and shaky, but also incredibly, wonderfully light. She looked at Gideon. He was watching her, a small, proud smile on his face. "You did it," he said softly. "No," Anya corrected him, a real smile, her first in what felt like a lifetime, spreading across her face. "We did it." In the quiet of the conference room, surrounded by the ghosts of their battle, a new chapter was beginning. The fight for justice was over. The long, slow journey of healing was just about to begin. And for the first time, Anya knew she wouldn't have to walk it alone. The silence that Beatrice left behind was heavier than any of the silences that had come before it. It was the sound of a vacuum, of a storm that had passed, leaving a strange and unsettling calm in its wake. Anya stared at the document on the table, Beatrice's angry signature a testament to their victory. She should have felt elated, triumphant. But all she felt was an overwhelming wave of exhaustion and a deep, hollowing sadness. Winning the battle didn't bring Nathan back. It didn't erase the pain of the last few months. It just confirmed how utterly and senselessly he had been betrayed. A single tear escaped and traced a slow path down her cheek. Then another. Soon she was crying silently, her shoulders shaking with the force of all the grief she had been holding back while she was fighting. This whole time, her anger had been a shield. Now the shield was gone, and she was left exposed and raw. Gideon didn't say anything. He didn't rush to comfort her or offer platitudes. He simply pulled his chair closer to hers and sat with her in the quiet, a silent, steady presence. He let her cry until the storm of her sorrow began to subside into a gentle rain. After a few minutes, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a clean, folded handkerchief, offering it to her without a word. Anya took it, her fingers brushing his. The simple, human contact was grounding. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "For everything." He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. The perfectly composed lawyer was gone, replaced by a man who looked just as drained as she felt. "I should be thanking you," he said, his voice low. "You reminded me of why I became a lawyer in the first place. It's not about the paperwork or the billable hours. It's supposed to be about this. He gestured around the empty room, at the signed confession. About making things right. He leaned back in his chair, looking out the large window at the city below. My life is very ordered, Anya. I like rules, facts, clear lines. This case, it was all a blur. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something that actually mattered. Here was his choice. He could retreat now, back into his neat, orderly life. The case was closed. His professional, and now personal, obligation was fulfilled. He could file the paperwork, transfer the estate back to her name, and send her a final polite invoice for his services, closing the door on this messy, emotional chapter. It would be the safe, logical thing to do. Anya wiped her eyes and looked around the sterile conference room. What do I do now, Gideon? She asked, the question hanging in the air. I have my house back. My life. But it's not my life anymore. It's just a house full of ghosts. The thought of going back there alone, of sleeping in the bed she had shared with Nathan, of sitting at the empty dining table, was unbearable. The house was a monument to a life that was over. She had fought to get it back, but now she wasn't sure she even wanted it. She had to choose what came next. She could sell it, move away, and try to start over somewhere new, or she could find a way to live with the ghosts, to build a new life on the foundations of the old one. Both paths felt impossible. Gideon turned from the window to look at her, and in his eyes, she saw an empathy that went far beyond professional concern. He saw her, truly saw her, adrift and alone in the wreckage. You don't have to decide that today, he said gently. You just have to get through this afternoon. He hesitated for a moment, making his own choice. He could walk away. He should walk away. But the thought of her going back to that empty house alone felt wrong. It felt like leaving a job half finished. Let me drive you, he offered. Back to the guest house, or back home. Whichever you want. Home, Anya said, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. She needed to go back. She couldn't hide forever. Okay, he said, standing up and gathering his things. Home it is. They rode the elevator down in a new kind of silence. It wasn't the tense, awkward silence of their first meeting or the charged, strategic silence before the confrontation. It was a soft, thoughtful quiet. Anya found herself studying him out of the corner of her eye. The sharp lines of his suit, the way his jaw was still tight with residual tension, the kindness in his eyes when he glanced over at her. He had risked his career for her, a woman he barely knew. When they stepped out of the building and into the bright afternoon sun, Anya blinked, as if waking from a long dream. The world was still moving. People were laughing, cars were honking, life was going on, loud and vibrant and messy. During the drive to Maple Lane, Gideon broke the silence. You know, he said, his eyes on the road. That house doesn't have to be a museum. It can be whatever you want it to be. You can paint the walls. You can move the furniture. You can make new memories there. It was a simple statement, but it struck a chord deep inside her. He was giving her permission to move forward, to not let her life be defined solely by her loss. When they pulled into the driveway, Anya stared at the familiar front door. It looked different now. Not like a prison, but like a possibility. Gideon cut the engine, but neither of them moved to get out. I can come in with you if you want, he offered quietly. Just for a little while. Help you? I don't know. Make some coffee. Open the windows. It was an offer that crossed the line from professional to personal, a clear signal that he wasn't ready to just walk away. Anya looked at him, at this man who had become her unlikely champion, her partner, her friend. She was still grieving. Her heart was still broken. But for the first time, she didn't feel completely, devastatingly alone. She had a choice to make, not just about the house, but about her heart. Could she let someone else in, even just a little? I'd like that, she said, her voice soft but sure. I'd like that very much. Together, They got out of the car and walked up the path. As Anya put her key in the lock, she realized she wasn't just opening a door to a house. She was opening a door to whatever came next. And as she stepped inside, with Gideon right there behind her, the silence that greeted them didn't feel heavy or mocking. It felt like a blank page, waiting for a new story to be written. They stepped into the house, and the afternoon light streamed through the living room windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was still and quiet, but the oppressive weight was gone. It felt like a house holding its breath, waiting. Gideon, true to his word, went straight to the kitchen to make coffee, the simple domestic sounds of him filling the cupboards and running the water chasing away the last of the silence. Anya walked into the living room and did something she hadn't done in weeks. She opened a window. A fresh breeze blew in, carrying the scent of cut grass and blooming flowers from a neighbor's garden. It smelled like life. She took a deep breath, and it felt like the first real breath she'd taken since the day Nathan died. Gideon came back into the room with 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers. The warmth of the mug seeped into her cold hands. "What now?" he asked softly, gesturing with his mug to the room, to the house, to her life. "I don't know," Anya confessed, but for the first time, the not knowing didn't feel terrifying. It felt open. I think I need to change things." She looked at the big heavy armchair where Nathan used to sit and read for hours. It was a painful reminder, a constant presence of his absence. "Starting with that chair," she said, a sudden resolve in her voice. Gideon looked at the chair, then back at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Okay," he said. "Where do you want to move it?" "I don't want to move it," she said. "I want to get rid of it." It was a symbolic act, a first step in reclaiming her space. Together, they maneuvered the heavy chair through the doorway and out onto the front porch. It was awkward and they bumped into the wall, a small burst of laughter escaping Anya's lips at their clumsiness. It was a rusty, unfamiliar sound, but it felt good. With the chair gone, the living room already looked bigger, brighter. Over the next few days, Gideon became a quiet, constant presence in her life. He didn't push or pry. He showed up after work with takeout, and they would sit on the floor of the half-empty living room, talking for hours. He told her about growing up in a small town, about his dream of being a musician before he went to law school, about the pressures of his perfectly ordered life. Anya found herself talking too, not just about Nathan and her grief, but about her own dreams, the ones she had put on hold. She told him about her love for painting, a passion she hadn't pursued in years. One afternoon, he showed up not with food, but with 2 large canvases, a set of paints, and a pair of easels. "I thought you might want to," he said, a little shyly. "And I figured I could try too. You can't be any worse than me." They set up the easels in the backyard, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the grass. Anya picked up a brush, and it felt like coming home. She didn't paint anything specific, just colors, letting her emotions flow onto the canvas. Dark blues and grays of her grief, but also streaks of yellow for hope, and a soft, warm pink she couldn't quite name. She glanced over at Gideon. He was frowning in concentration, a smear of green paint on his cheek, diligently trying to paint a picture of her dog, who was sleeping in the sun. He was terrible at it, but he was trying, and the sight filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. The house began to transform. The walls were painted a soft, creamy white. New, lighter furniture replaced the old, heavy pieces. The ghosts didn't vanish, but they receded, becoming gentle memories instead of painful presences. The house started to feel like hers. One evening, after they had finished painting, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. "Anya," Gideon said, turning to her. His expression was serious. "I have to confess something." Her heart gave a little flutter of anxiety. "What is it?" "My life before I met you, it was gray," he said, searching for the words. It was all straight lines and predictable outcomes. I was successful, but I wasn't happy. And then this case happened, and I met you, and everything turned to color. He looked at her, his gaze direct and full of a feeling she was just beginning to recognize. I'm not just your lawyer anymore, Anya. And I haven't been for a while. Her heart was beating fast. This was it. The culmination of all these shared moments, the final choice. She could retreat into the safety of her grief, into the memory of the love she had lost. Or she could be brave enough to step toward a new one. I know, she said softly. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. I know it's soon. And I know your heart is still healing. I would never want to replace Nathan. But I think I'm falling in love with you, Anya. And I can wait. I will wait as long as you need me to. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion. She thought of the silver locket she still wore. My everything. Nathan would always be a part of her, the great love of her past. But Gideon felt like the promise of a future. He hadn't just helped her win back her house, he had helped her win back her life. He had shown her that her story wasn't over. She squeezed his hand, a radiant smile breaking through her tears. I think, she said, her voice filled with a hope that felt real and solid, that you might not have to wait very long at all. He smiled back, a smile of pure joy and relief, and in that moment, under the painted sky, Anya knew she was home. Not just in the house, but in this new, unexpected, and beautiful chapter of her life. The central event of the story, the cruel reading of the will, had been an ending. But it had also been a beginning. It had led her out of a life of comfortable love and into the arms of a love that was brave, patient, and born from the ashes of a tragedy. It was a love she never expected, a love that had, in the end, saved her. 6 months passed. The seasons turned, and with them, so did the landscape of Anya's life. The house on Maple Lane was no longer a place of haunting echoes, but a symphony of light and color. The living room, once dominated by the heavy, dark furniture of the past, was now an open, airy space filled with her paintings. Some leaned against the walls, others hung in simple frames, a vibrant tapestry of her journey from grief to healing. The room Nathan had used as a cluttered office was now her studio, its walls splattered with paint, its air thick with the smell of turpentine and possibility. This was where she spent most of her days, brush in hand, rediscovering the person she was outside of her grief. Gideon remained her steady anchor. His life, once a fortress of solitude and order, had been joyfully invaded by the beautiful chaos of hers. He had his own coffee mug in the kitchen now, a bright yellow one that stood out against her simple white set. He learned to tolerate the smudges of paint she often left on light switches and doorknobs. Most evenings, he would come home not to his quiet, empty apartment, but here to her. They would cook dinner together, their movements an easy, familiar dance in the small kitchen. They talked, they laughed, and sometimes, they just sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found solace in each other's presence. He had kept his promise. He never pushed, never rushed. He gave her space to heal, to find her footing in this new world. And in that space, love had quietly, gently bloomed. It wasn't a wild, passionate fire, but a warm, steady glow that had thawed the last of the ice around her heart. One cool autumn evening, they were sitting on the sofa, a soft blanket shared between them, the house quiet except for the gentle crackle of a fire in the hearth. Anya was leaning against his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace so profound it was almost dizzying. I have something for you, Gideon said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She sat up, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Oh? Is it another disastrous painting of my dog? She teased. His last attempt was now framed and hanging in the laundry room, a testament to his enthusiasm over his talent. He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound. No. It's a bit more official than that. He reached for his briefcase, which was sitting by the sofa, and pulled out a long, elegant frame, wrapped carefully in brown paper. He handed it to her. It was surprisingly heavy. Anya's fingers fumbled slightly as she unwrapped it. For a brief second, seeing the official-looking frame, a ghost of her past fear flickered. Legal documents. Official papers. Gideon saw the flicker in her eyes and his expression softened. "It's okay," he said gently. "It's not what you think. It's just some words." She pulled the last of the paper away. Inside a simple dark wood frame was a piece of thick, cream-colored parchment. At the top, in elegant calligraphy, were 2 words, a declaration. Below, the text was handwritten in Gideon's neat, precise script. It looked formal, almost like a will. Her heart caught in her throat. "Can I read it to you?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. She could only nod, her eyes fixed on the document. He cleared his throat, and in the quiet room, his voice was the only sound. It was the same steady, formal voice he had used in the conference room all those months ago, but this time, it was filled with an emotion that made her heart ache with joy. "To Anya," he began, his eyes meeting hers over the top of the frame. "The woman who taught me that the most important lines are not found in contracts, but are the lines of a smile. I, Gideon, being of sound mind and a profoundly full heart, do hereby bequeath the following." He paused, and his gaze was so full of love it took her breath away. "Item, all of my patience, for the days the memories are still heavy. Item, all of my laughter, to fill every quiet corner of this house. Item, all of my warmth, for every cold night from now until the end of our days. Item, all of my admiration, for the strength you have shown and the beautiful art you create. Item, all of my future, to build with you, to explore with you, and to cherish with you." He took a deep breath, his voice dropping to a near whisper as he reached the final crucial lines. The echo of that terrible day was unmistakable, but he was reclaiming it, transforming it into the most beautiful vow she had ever heard. "In short," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "contrary to any documents you may have heard in the past, I leave you everything. Everything I am, and everything I will ever be." The last words hung in the air, a perfect, healing circle. The phrase that had shattered her world, "I leave you nothing," was vanquished, replaced by a promise so complete, so absolute, it mended the last of the broken pieces of her heart. Tears streamed freely down her face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. She set the frame down carefully and launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his neck. "Yes," she whispered against his skin. "Yes." He held her tight, his hands stroking her back. "Is that a yes to my declaration?" he murmured into her hair. She pulled back, her face beaming, her eyes shining with tears and love. "It's a yes to everything, Gideon. To all of it." He framed her face with his hands and kissed her, a deep, lingering kiss that was not about a beginning, but about a continuation. It was a promise of 1,000 more sunsets on the porch, 1,000,000 more cups of coffee, a lifetime of filling the blank pages of their story together. As they held each other in the warm glow of the fire, surrounded by the colors of her new life, Anya knew that the greatest loves aren't always the ones that start with a fairy tale. Sometimes, they are the ones that rise from the ashes, unexpected and brave, a quiet, steady flame that burns brighter and truer than you ever could have imagined. Sometimes, the most painful endings are just the beginning of a story you never knew you were meant to live. What unexpected beginning has come from a difficult ending in your own life? We'd love to read your stories in the comments.